Bonsoir Annecy, je viens du futur. Good evening Annecy, I come from the future to tell you about what animation is going to look like. No, just kidding, I'm from the present, and we have three very talented, very lovely, experienced ladies to inform me and you about where the industry is headed this evening. I'd like to bring each of them out here on stage. First, representing sort of the state of European animation and its destiny, she's head of television, video, and new media for STUDIOCANAL, Françoise Guyonnet. Daughter of the creator of the Muppets and CEO of the family business, that is both the Henson family and a business geared at creating family entertainment for television and movies. Our next guest also served previously as a creative executive at Columbia and Warner Brothers Pictures, Lisa Henson. Lisa's based in Los Angeles, as is our next guest, who also comes from America. She serves as an executive producer on The Little Prince. Before that, she has a very varied career in terms of different animation projects. She's worked on Dinosaur, on Space Jam, with Pixar on Finding Nemo, more recently on independent films such as Nine and Escape from Planet Earth. Jinko Gotoh. Well, let's start sort of with your clip as a jumping off point. For the last 20 years almost, since Toy Story sort of brought in this wave of CG, computer animation, we've just sort of seen it dominate the animation industry. But the slate that STUDIOCANAL has coming up, not only does it have N-wave CG films, but just a real variety, stop motion. In a way, I find that incredibly encouraging, because all of these are sort of upcoming films from STUDIOCANAL, just proving that CG hasn't sort of driven everything else off the screen. Would you speak a little bit about the different styles? By the way, before you get a chance to answer, this is sort of a bilingual panel, so if you didn't pick up your interpreters, you may want to run off and get them early on. Go ahead, Françoise.
Juste un petit mot avant, je suis désolée, il n'y avait pas de lapin dans ce trailer, c'est quand même une grosse erreur quand on est à Annecy. Oui, effectivement, le slot, le line-up de STUDIOCANAL montre ce qui, je crois, est un des avenirs de l'animation au niveau international. C'est des genres très variés d'animation en termes d'image. On a aussi bien de la 3D et de la 3D stéréoscopique que de la 2D. On a fait également chez STUDIOCANAL de la prise de vue réelle avec de l'incrustation d'images en 3D comme dans Paddington, ou bien de la stop motion avec la collaboration qu'on a avec Hardman, qu'on a eue cette année par exemple sur Chaud le Mouton. À mon sens, toutes ces animations ont tout à fait des places. Alors, il est vrai que l'animation 3D est quand même l'animation qui est aujourd'hui la plus mainstream, notamment si on veut toucher le territoire nord-américain. Mais je pense qu'il y a vraiment une place pour des films avec des budgets raisonnables sur de la 2D ou de la stop motion, où Lisa nous en parlera tout à l'heure sur de l'animation avec des poupettes.
We'll bring interpreters out for you guys, so it'll be a little easier, but to sort of play off of her answer, let me recap a little bit in English. I mean, she's observing that in addition to, of course you have CG films working at a very, very high budget, but within sort of the vast range and below that, there's room for all of these other styles that you've seen stop motion with Aardman, including the sort of style, Lisa, that the Henson Company is sort of innovating, or has sort of like, for centuries mastered and is growing into the world of CG with puppetry-based animation. I wonder, Lisa, for the benefit here at the beginning, if you could kind of explain a little bit the animation style that the Henson Company specializes in, because it's similar to other types, but it's really something unique.
Yes, I think we all are moving into the digital era, and some movies will be made purely digitally, and some things that we do are done purely with puppetry. So as a company, we're doing some things typical CG animation, some things pure puppetry in the old way, and then the things we get the most excited about are the hybrids, where there's a project that takes the strength of what we've done in puppetry and then moves it into the digital era one way or the other. So I did bring a little thing. Is it too soon to show it? It's just, or do you want to show it later?
However, well, let's save it for a little bit.
We'll save it
later.
for a little bit later, but I think we're moving into a time where we should not try to copy Pixar and DreamWorks movies, but take the styles and the craftsmanship that we love, whatever that is, and try to make something special and maybe a little bit more new, using your own strengths and not try to copy what somebody else is doing.
Jinko, you've worked in an incredibly varied sort of range of different animation styles, and sort of came out of that world of CG, in those early kind of when it was almost sort of a visual effect to incorporate CG into other films. I mean, how do you sort of feel about the dominance or place of computer animation in the world today?
Well, it's really interesting because I think when computer graphics or computer animation first started, it was really about trying to mimic photorealism. So everybody wanted to do photoreal. So there's that visual effects world that have, obviously over the last 25, 30 years have really done well. That you have movies like Gravity today, which is really animated, but it's photoreal. And then you have Pixar movies or DreamWorks movies where they've actually taken computer animation and has really created a new medium in animation by computers. And then when I was at Disney, we had basically traditional animation and CG combined that created a new medium that allowed us to do CG backgrounds, CG layout, to give you this volume, this sense of 3D. And now I think with digital technology, you can see it all the way down to gaming, you can see it in television, and I think it's just going to continue to allow the art form, I think, to really expand.
Would you talk a little bit about, in the Little Prince, it's a sort of rare movie where you have a combination of different animation styles at work. You have I don't know if you guys have seen the trailer or any of the material yet, but like basically the movie is a computer animated film where the portions that involve the Little Prince are primarily stop motion. It's like, would you talk about that choice at all?
Yes, so I mean, Mark Osborne, the director, he did this consciously, wanting to make sure that the book we preserved the book. And preserving the book, he wanted the feeling of paper. And really getting that sense of paper, that tactic feel, he felt stop motion was the best medium to use. And whereas the real world of the movie, he wanted to do this in CG. So that's why we made those choices to go down the pathway of using both CG and stop motion.
And you guys are basically in business at STUDIOCANAL with a stop motion company, which in some ways is, I think, effectively the oldest form of animation there was. The sort of frame by frame manipulating with, Aardman is carrying on this tradition, today. I'm curious, just sort of what your sense is, maybe of like the different cultures in terms of is there one of these mediums or one of these styles that sort of is more artistic, one that's more technical, or does it all sort of bring the same type of talent?
En travaillant avec Aardman sur Cheveux de le Mouton, on s'est rendu compte en fait que la stop motion était voyageait dans le monde entier. Lionsgate va sortir le film aux États-Unis au mois d'août prochain. Qui sera une sortie, ce qu'ils appellent une wide release, donc une sortie large. Donc c'est un genre qui voyage bien. Après, effectivement, suivant les territoires, on a eu des réflexions du type c'est plus cinéma d'auteur ou c'est plus cinéma large. Par exemple, en Allemagne, Sean est un personnage très très populaire et la stop motion est plutôt perçue comme un genre très large. En France, on a toujours considéré que la stop motion, Hardman, c'était plutôt un petit peu du cinéma art et essai, et on a eu un très très bon accueil, notamment dans ces cinémas-là, même si la sortie s'est passée dans tout type de salles. On est sorti sur 500 copies, donc en France c'était quand même très très large. Mais donc je pense que ce qui est important, c'est que l'image soit adaptée à l'histoire qu'on veut raconter. Jinko l'a bien expliqué pour Le Petit Prince. Et aujourd'hui, ce qui est important, c'est d'avoir un style d'animation qui correspond au script, et au scénario et à l'histoire qu'on a envie de raconter.
Jinko, I don't know, did you happen to go to the presentation this morning that Pixar did for Good Dinosaur?
No, I missed that.
I don't know if you've seen anything yet from it, but it was so interesting to me as you've worked on Dinosaur before, and
yes.
your comment sort of about one of the early attractions, I think, for audiences to those movies was just, it's hard to believe now they've mastered fur, now they've mastered, sort of water, all these kind of photoreal benchmarks. But in Dinosaur, the idea seemed to be to take photo plates, real footage of nature, and to insert the most realistic dinosaurs you could. And it seems like with Pixar, on this new film, what they're doing is trying to render the most realistic environments you can, and to have highly stylized, cartoony characters, which is sort of like, I mean, it's just
That's
interesting
great.
to see like that we've come so far, but I mean, I guess to sort of dig a question out of my observation, maybe I'm curious if, like, have we reached a place where the gee whiz factor on CG might be kind of like running out a little bit? I think that's what was sort of driving a lot of that desire, and then it shifts the emphasis to something else. I don't know what you have to do now to distinguish yourself in this marketplace as any sort of animated film.
Well, I think you really have to go down to basically, I mean, we want to tell the best stories as possible. And we're looking at the different animation styles and technology to be able to use that. So I think we always have to look down and say, what is the best way to tell the story? And then what's unique about animation is that then you can really take technology and push that art form. Go back all the way to the first days of Walt Disney. I mean, that's exactly what he did. And that's what we're continuing to do. And I think the digital technology is allowing us to go beyond what we're doing today. And so that's really what's exciting. And I think it's the stories that drive that. And so I think it's really clever that Pixar came up with the idea of, let's make a photoreal environment, and let's put a cartoony dinosaur in it. I think that's brilliant. But I'm sure it's because of storytelling.
Right. Yeah. Lisa, is there any sort of like mantra or philosophy that drives, kind of like which projects are pursued at the Henson Company? Yeah.
Well, we tend to develop things that are really new, and it goes against the sort of popular wisdom right now that everything has to be a pre-sold title or something where people already are aware of the brand. What we're developing right now, none of those things are pre-sold titles. And I think you see reflected in the success of the biggest animated movies right now that people are responding to the richest movie, the movie that gives you the most in every way. So if it's How to Train Your Dragon or The Croods or Big Hero 6 or Frozen, these movies are not pre-sold on a toy or a TV show, but they are as full of entertainment as any live action movie, if not more so. So you have everything that a live action movie has, and beautiful design and beautiful animation. So it's a really full meal, and so we're looking in development for projects that have that kind of potential.
What is the situation like in Europe? Because it must be a little bit like being in the position of an independent animation company, in the sense of you have competition coming in the form of these enormous budgets, these high, with the support of marketing and franchises and sequels coming from America, from the big studios. Where does STUDIOCANAL sort of fit into that competitive marketplace?
Nous échangions ce midi avec Lisa, et effectivement, je pense que quand on est un studio européen, on n'est pas si loin d'être dans les mêmes philosophies qu'un indépendant américain. Et donc de chercher des bonnes histoires et des environnements très spéciaux. Je pense qu'on est sur des films effectivement qui ne sont pas des films à énorme budget comme les blockbusters américains. On est plutôt sur des films du milieu. Chez STUDIOCANAL, des films entre 15 et 60 millions de dollars. Et donc on va chercher des films qui ont une personnalité très forte dans leur histoire et aussi dans leur environnement graphique. Demain soir, on présente en compétition officielle Avril et le monde truqué, et c'est un film qui s'est inspiré de l'univers graphique de Jacques Tardy. Vous voyez des images du monde truqué, elles ressemblent à aucune autre image, je pense, de film d'animation qu'on voit. C'est vraiment un environnement très particulier. Et Christian Desmar, le réalisateur, avait d'ailleurs fait une classe master il y a 2 ans, je crois, ici, pour expliquer comment il avait essayé d'adapter le style graphique et le trait délié de Tardy dans ses bandes dessinées, et comment il avait travaillé pendant plusieurs mois pour arriver à garder ce trait délié pour l'animation, alors qu'on est plutôt sur des formes fermées sur l'animation. Donc tout ce travail-là donne une personnalité au film qui, selon nous, va faire que ce film va pouvoir voyager, parce qu'on a quand même des ambitions évidemment internationales sur nos films, et on espère bien qu'il sera distribué dans le monde entier.
In regards to sort of adaptations, in the same way that April and The Extraordinary World sort of comes from a lesser known but sort of respected sort of bande dessinée comic book sort of. I mean, I'm thinking of The Little Prince, and just sort of what an interesting opportunity and an enormous challenge that must be, given that it's a beloved book known around the world, and yet the book doesn't necessarily suggest a feature-length story, and you've obviously you as a team have interpreted that in a very, I guess, special way that only the people who came together kind of would have cracked it that way. I mean, what was the approach there in terms of sort of like trying to make sure that you did right by that property?
Well, interesting enough, I mean, that was the biggest challenge that Mark had. So when the French producers originally approached to him, he said, I can't make this movie. This is one of my favorite books of my entire life, and you're asking me to make this movie. Right. And interesting enough, Orson Welles actually wrote a screenplay of The Little Prince. And so Mark thought, okay, I need to get the hold of the script. Let's see what Orson Welles had to say about this. And it took him months to get a copy of the script. And once he read it, he was highly disappointed. And he said, oh my God, what am I going to do? And he spent months really thinking about, how do I protect this book and share this story to the world that don't know about the book? I mean, interesting enough, obviously most people in Europe know the book. In Japan, it's the highest selling book in Japan. But in America, I think you have about 40% of the population know the book. I think about 60–70% of the population have heard the title, but they don't know the book. So really the challenge was to take this precious book and create a movie out of this that would allow the fans to love the movie as much as the people that didn't know about the book would want to read the book after they see the movie. So that was really, that's what was behind Mark's thinking.
And Lisa, you were basically saying, when you say you are dealing with new things, you're basically meaning original properties. They're being sort of invented in-house or being brought to you as potential partnerships? Or
books that perhaps are not as well known, perhaps more similar to the April type development, where there's something that it is based on, but not that, well, I guess maybe people don't speak about it over here as much as in the United States. Everything now they want pre-sold. Like the brand is already famous, people already want to go, so it makes their job at marketing it easier. So like the Lego movie, it would be pre-sold. So that's the type of thing that we don't develop that very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's maybe talk about your sort of upcoming project. Would it be all right if we sort of took a look at the sort of presentation about the show that you guys are doing?
Yes, if people don't mind to wade through a little bit of description about this television program. It's a preschool show that we have. It's about fish. Actually, we were laughing because all of us have produced shows about Nemo. I mean, for goodness sakes, yay. And they have Sammy.
Yeah.
And so we have a fish show coming up. The fish designs are pretty simple because it's for preschool, but if people know, as they watch it, you'll see that it was all animated by puppeteers, and so we have no animators on the show. And that's just I thought might be curious for people to see a show animated with no animators.
Yeah. I wonder if you could give us sort of like, explain for us the step that puppetry went through sort of from the old, from the style that we all sort of saw with physical puppets being shot on, film or whatever, to this sort of virtual filter that now exists, because it looks like they're using the same kind of rigs that they would have that you would have had sort of back in the old Muppet days, basically.
Well, the thing that they're puppeteering into, that piece of hardware, we build that hardware ourselves, and it was originally built to control animatronic puppets. So the intermediary step was when the puppeteers were doing remote animation of a kind of robotic character. And we used those exact same controls and hooked it up to the digital puppets.
So this would have been dating back to movies like would it have been like the Dark Crystal era even?
Not quite that far, because we didn't have, that was cable controls and not computer controls. But by the time we did, there was a TV show, I don't know if it came here on ABC, called Dinosaurs, with big walking around dinosaurs. And the heads all had this remote puppeteering. So they just hooked up this piece of hardware to the digital puppets, and we use the exact same controls. Every puppeteer can do their own programming on the rig, and they can set what fingers will operate which facial animation. So the puppeteers are animating, but they do it kind of individually and only using these controls. There was also an interesting thing in this one, because we often use motion capture body performers. We have a TV show called Sid the Science Kid, where the kids are operated by people in motion capture suits. But here, that was a simple Kinect video game controller that was swimming the fish.
Right. Did you guys pick up on that in the clip? I mean, basically, what you guys are doing with this then is you're using sort of animation technology that's available to anyone in this room.
It's kind of DIY.
Yeah, and you're sort of hacking it with a really inventive, sort of like proprietary thing. But in a way, I think there's something very inspirational about this. No one in this room has access to sort of like the decades of experience on puppetry, but it suggests what can be done kind of like off the shelf, basically.
Yeah, we actually have those camera controllers are also regular camera controls.
Just curious, did your puppeteer say it's hard to animate fish? Because that was one of the things that we learned at Pixar way back, that animating fish was not so easy.
Meaning just the face, but no other sort of body parts, or what's limiting?
Well, things have changed so much. Yeah. Almost all of that animation was automatic. So the fin movements and everything's pre-programmed, and it just goes.
I see.
Yeah.
Back in those days.
I want to hear why is a fish so hard to do? Harder than a car,
Well, it's because it's in water, right? So to make it feel like it's swimming in water.
I see. Okay. Yeah. But in terms of the partnerships that STUDIOCANAL has, it's basically the full range of, not the full range of budgets. None of these are dealing with like Pixar budgets, but something like Paddington is obviously a very expensive, high-end sort of production, and it seems like something like April and the Extraordinary World is being done very modestly. What is your sense in terms of kind of like I guess the right sort of you know, space for sort of like risks, and how do you kind of determine kind of like even the, you know, the right horses that you're going to bet on, if you understand what I mean, in terms of what is the independent sort of level budget range these days, and is it scary to be that far away from like the Pixar level or something?
Non, je dirais que tout dépend du projet. On ne se fixe pas une target particulière pour le budget, mais Paddington était un projet très très ambitieux. C'était le plus gros budget sur lequel STUDIOCANAL a investi, parce qu'il y avait 2 films à faire en fait. Il y avait un film d'animation avec l'animation de l'ours Paddington qui devait être vraiment très réel au sein d'un film en prise de vue réelle avec des acteurs connus, Hugh Bonneville, Nicole Kidman. Donc c'était quasiment un double budget, d'où ce budget important. Aujourd'hui, sur les films d'animation européens, je dirais qu'on investit plutôt sur des budgets entre 15 et 20 millions de dollars. C'est des budgets réalistes pour des films qui s'exportent à peu près dans le monde entier, et après qui ont des sorties plus ou moins larges, notamment en Chine ou aux États-Unis. Les films qu'on fait avec N-Wave, par exemple, qui sont les films en 3D relief, sont des films sur lesquels on a des box-office internationaux en général de l'ordre de 50 millions de dollars. Donc ça donne une idée à peu près du budget qu'on peut se permettre d'investir sur ce type de film.
Sorry, I can tell that.
Sorry, we lost the reception.
But it's not just us. Does anyone else having trouble with the translation?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not these.
Yes, something happened.
The microphone, I think.
Okay. Is it your machine that's broken? The interpreter? Okay. All right. Well, we'll carry on in English. Yeah. But sorry for that. In the case of
I can switch in English if necessary.
In the case of the Little Prince, I mean, this is for an independent animated film and an incredibly sort of ambitious budget to work with. But again, I'm sort of interested to know kind of like how do you sort of like fix on the right target for that? We don't necessarily have to talk numbers, but like there's sort of a push and pull between knowing ahead of time how much potential the film has and the demands that the style, the team, everything is going to cost. You know, can you talk a little bit about sort of like
Sure.
arriving at that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one thing is that when you're an independent film, you're looking at foreign pre-sales to set you up. And obviously there's the US market for US distribution being the biggest number. But I mean, you have to be cognizant about the kind of stories that you want to tell. You have to be extremely disciplined about development and when you physically start production, because we just don't have the resources that big studio movies have of spending a lot of time with a big crew of trying to figure out story. And
do you feel like I'm sort of curious to know sort of the direction things are going in, and it's encouraging that sort of, I don't know if it's fair to call you guys a medium budget, because it's still a pretty expensive film, but it's like because I think we've seen the kind of very modest animated films kind of like coming out. I think maybe Escape from Planet Earth is an example of a very sort of responsibly budgeted film, but now we're seeing people take bigger and bigger risks. Certainly those Leica movies are all kind of in that range. It's just all part of this diversity I think we're seeing in style and price, but I don't know if I'm reading the tea leaves right. I don't know if, I mean, Lisa, you've done a lot of studying of these.
I would like to talk about it because I think we have in Hollywood a misconception, I think, that animated film either has to be very big, as expensive as Pixar, DreamWorks, or the Illumination, Chris Meledandri's films on the lower end of that, but still very expensive. The expectation is the film will be like that, or else will be very micro-budgeted and put out as an art release or through a classics company. And I have a lot of hope for the middle level of animated films, because there really is no reason that a feature film has to cost $100 million. And you know, Jinko has made lower budget films than Little Prince that are good films. And I think very good films can be made for $20 to $30, $35 million that would have very good production value. But they fall into a middle zone that some people are nervous about. So, you know, I'm very interested to see what can be done with those mid-range animated films, because there's every possibility that they will be as good in terms of storytelling, directing, performing, all the creative elements that just don't have to be that expensive.
Well, it seems almost like maybe the convincing has to happen, at least in America, at the distribution level, where it's like you have, you know, big studios behind, and Paramount will release The Little Prince, and, you know, Disney's, you know, partner with Pixar, but but almost everything else, certainly all the rest of the world of animation falls to, you know, a company like G-Kids is sort of a hero of that space. But where is the, you know, just
Where's
a few,
the mid-range?
Yeah. I mean, what's your sort of sense there? Like, you know, is it that you have to convince, you know, sort of like the distributors to sort of like think differently, or?
There are several distributors that will do about one a year, and so if you can get that one slot with Open Road, with Relativity, the 2 slots that Weinstein's has. You know, there's just very few, because none of those companies specialize in those kind of films, so they just will take a limited number of bets. But some have performed well, and you know, the moderately, particularly the Weinsteins have marketed those moderate budgeted films well.
From the point of view of STUDIOCANAL, I mean, that's essentially what you guys are doing. You're representing that sort of middle range animated film that a lot of these movies don't come out in the States, or come out in a very, very reduced capacity. I don't know if you have a sense of like why they work in France, but you know, don't seem to in the States. You know?
Aujourd'hui, tous nos films sont distribués aux États-Unis. On a annoncé hier qu'Avril sortait avec J-Kids aux États-Unis. Shaun sort donc cet été avec Lionsgate. Paddington est sorti, a été distribué par les Weinstein. Après, je dirais que c'est plutôt, effectivement, certains sortent sur des combinaisons très larges et d'autres sur des combinaisons plus étroites. Mais on arrive à trouver des partenaires américains pour les sorties des films européens. Et nos films sortent tous également en Chine depuis maintenant 2-3 années, je dirais.
Sort of gazing into our future crystal ball, one thing that I think is interesting to consider is sort of, we've been talking, you know, about film and television, which are the kind of 2 most common media, or like outlets for animation to appear, but it's sort of trickling out, or it's already sort of well placed in, you know, mobile devices, all these other, you know, kind of things on the web, things like that. You know, it's so I'm curious to what extent you see, you know, there being this kind of evolution of platforms, you know, but some of it's an extension of features. You know, we could talk a little bit maybe about Avril and The Extraordinary World as an example of, you know, something where it's like it doesn't live solely on the big screen, but has other components as well.
Oui, alors chez STUDIOCANAL aujourd'hui, effectivement, on considère notamment les plateformes digitales plutôt comme un moyen de raconter différemment la même histoire. Donc sur Avril, en fait, ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a créé un site internet qui va être lancé dans les jours qui viennent, dans lesquels on pourra vivre une aventure qui sera une aventure différente de celle du film, mais dans le même univers, dans le même monde uchronique qui a été créé pour le film d'Avril et le monde truqué. On pourrait pousser plus loin la logique, effectivement, aujourd'hui, et produire uniquement pour des plateformes digitales, que ce soit mobile ou Internet. Aujourd'hui, chez nous, chez STUDIOCANAL, on a plutôt pris le parti que ça devienne une façon de créer un environnement autour du film, et c'est ce qu'on a fait sur Avril avec cette plateforme, enfin ce site internet, et aussi à travers une exposition qu'on a lancée la semaine dernière au Musée des Arts et Métiers, qui est un musée à Paris, et qui durera jusqu'au mois de mars 2016, où là, de la même façon, on peut se promener à travers le musée et découvrir des objets qui sont présents dans le monde d'Avril et le monde truqué, ou des objets qui sont absents, puisque ce monde existe parce que, et est différent du nôtre parce que certains scientifiques ont disparu. Donc on peut découvrir les objets inventés par ces scientifiques dans ce musée. Donc tout ça pour dire que je pense qu'effectivement, un des avenirs de l'animation, c'est de réfléchir à raconter peut-être une histoire principale à travers une série télé ou un film, mais aussi à raconter d'autres histoires ou à prolonger en tous les cas l'expérience du public sur d'autres supports.
I mean, I think we saw, like last year, there was that sort of Google experiment with these kind of interactive shorts being made for mobile phones. You know, Glenn Keane did one, a Disney animator, you know, duet. But it seems like maybe while the opportunity is there, and it seems like maybe the challenge is like the revenue isn't quite in the same way. You know, I mean, have either of you sort of worked at all sort of beyond the screens that you've sort of traditionally you know, sort of been focused on to branch out at?
I mean, I'm very excited about that because this whole transmedia allows for different type of storytelling, and I think it will allow us to create brands and characters that then you can leverage into the larger format. So I think it's trying to figure out what that storytelling process is. What is that creative process where you're looking at the little phone or the iPad, because that experience is different than watching on a large screen. So I'm very hopeful that this new generation of animators, you know, that grew up, you know, playing video games and having the computer, that they'll figure out a way of telling great stories in that small platform, because I think that's what's going to allow us to make that next leap.
I have a thought about
go
that.
ahead.
Also, as each of the new technologies comes along, the fully digital film is going to adapt to those things more easily. So when people were interested in 3D stereoscopic, only a few live action movies could do that convincingly, but every animated CG movie could do it. And I think the same will be true of the Oculus and the virtual experiences, that the live action will lag behind the animated content in terms of just being very compelling in those new mediums.
Right,
so
it's
you
like
have it's already
intrinsically
digital to begin with.
Yeah, yeah.
Just in terms of those other types of digital experiences, you know, there are problems of shared assets, that it's rarely as easy to use your assets from one technology to the other. So, but in terms of adapting to new technologies, it's great with, you know, when you have a digital program.
Well, let's talk about sort of collectively. Let's talk about sort of like the talent that's out there. And I mean, I think one thing that's interesting, if you look at that shift that happened with computer animation, is that already you started to see a different type of person be able to enter the world of animation. It didn't have to be someone who could draw necessarily. And it's like, and now there's sort of, you know, an evolving world where there are potentially other skills. Jinko, I'm curious, just because your own sort of path to animation is so interesting, and it came through the visual effects kind of you know, world. If you would just share sort of a personal side.
Sure. I mean, for me, it was like I was a little over 50 years ago. I was a little child, and so Lady and the Tramp, and just fell in love with that whole world. And at the time, I was still living in Japan, and my father was already traveling to the US. And so as a child, I saw these two dogs in this landscape, and I imagined myself in that landscape. So I was completely smitten by animation. And then shortly after that, I met Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy. And for me, that was it. I said to my dad, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And my dad looked at me and said, well, you know, he was a medical doctor before he became an animator, so we want you to have a real profession. And what ended up happening was that I can't draw. So, you know, you can't draw, you know, you struggle and go, okay, well, how am I going to do this? And so I ended up going to engineering school. And I was an applied math major, and then computers were coming, you know, and I took a computer graphics course, and I thought, oh my God, here's a way that I can actually do this. So I spent my graduate school being a programmer and working on one of the first computer animated movies for the medical school, which was the interaction of carcinogens and DNA. Not much storytelling, but...
I'm sure it was a big hit at SIGGRAPH, right?
Yes, it was. So,
only we old people get that joke.
I know. So anyway, I mean, that's, you know, that's really my path. And of course, you know, when computer graphics started, it was all about photorealism. And I was like, for me, it was like, I want to tell magical stories. It's not about photorealism. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Toy Story happened, and you could see.
Well, and do you see that as sort of like, any of you, do you see that as sort of like being, you know, more possible now that there are these kind of unconventional entryways? I mean, what you guys do is very specific at the Henson Company in terms of the kind of skills you need to be a puppeteer to be able to sort of, you know, animate in these worlds. But there are new jobs being created around that. You know, it's like.
Well, we also have some projects with other animation styles, because once we just broke through and did one animated project, because the company never did animation, now we have embraced different animation styles. So we have a stop motion project in development as well as a 2D television show. So, you know, we are trying different things. But for particularly the digital puppetry studio, all the people doing that are trained puppeteers.
And as for the other then formats, I mean, is that something where certainly you're recruiting different types of people from what you've used before? I think you guys tend to work more with live action people, actually.
We do. We have live action directors and live action writers. We have what you looked at. We have no storyboards, and we do everything live and at the same time. So the camera moves, the layout, the voice track is done at the same time, and so we just have a rehearsal on set, and then we do make the take. So even though it has a digital animation end product, the process is like a live action, which is interesting. And there are so many different sorts of hybrid projects out there. And I think earlier you mentioned something about the fine line between live action and animation, and you mentioned Gravity. There's so many feature films now that they star a live action human, but it is otherwise an animated film. And you know, we're having a lot of blurred lines now about what's an animated film. From
Paddington, where it's very obvious, to Gravity, where like you would be surprised to learn, you know, how little of it is actually live action. You know, it's I mean, that's certainly something that I think.
C'est d'ailleurs la même société qui a fait les effets spéciaux de Gravity et qui a créé le personnage de Paddington, c'est Framestore.
Did you realize that it's the same company that responsible? But yeah, so there you go. I mean, it's like it goes to show that sort of, you know, animation and visual effects departments are living side by side. MacGuff here in, you know, France is sort of like had these two departments, you know, one that's sort of become the engine behind Illumination, you know. Well, another factor obviously is just the composition of the workforce, which was largely male for such a long time. I think it's encouraging and obvious looking at the panel that it's not entirely so anymore. But I don't know how representative you feel of your industry. I mean, to what extent are women finding, you know, their place in animation? Once upon a time, their job was at the very bottom, just sort of like, you know, cleaning the cells or whatever, you know, or painting, I think, you know, a lot of the color into the cells. But that was sort of like the woman's place in animation once upon a time. Are we better off now?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, what's really interesting is that I'm also part of Women in Animation, which is a volunteer international organization. And we're an advocacy group to really help empower women to become leaders in the animation industry. And we just recently finished our survey. And about 60% of the student body today in all the animation schools around the globe are girls. And I think, you know, you can look at this audience and see how many gals are sitting here in the audience. And you know, I think what's going to happen over the next decade, I hope, is that all of you guys, you know, move into this artistic leadership roles, because today it's like less than 20%. So
yeah, that's encouraging. Where do we have to grow, though? I mean, like apart from the where we stand today, Do you guys have thoughts? Do you ladies have thoughts?
On commence en France, Corinne Cooper est dans la salle. On commence une initiative comme aux États-Unis, Women in Animation, qui s'appelle Les femmes s'animent, pour justement essayer, déjà la première chose, de récupérer des statistiques autour de cette problématique-là, de la place des femmes dans l'animation, parce qu'à vrai dire, aujourd'hui, on a assez peu d'informations sur ces aspects-là. A priori, on en parlait tout à l'heure, on pense qu'effectivement, ce n'est pas tellement dans les postes d'exécutifs, où finalement il y a pas mal de femmes, on les représente assez bien ce soir, mais peut-être plus dans des postes de middle management, dans les équipes créatives, où les femmes ont encore besoin de faire leur place.
It's true. I mean, there are sort of like scandalously few female directors, where but it's actually quite encouraging. You know, if you look across high-level jobs, you know, at Fox Animation, at DreamWorks Animation, you know, many of those posts are held by women. You know?
Well, women feel very comfortable being producers and also creative executives. And, you know, for instance, at DreamWorks, all the producers are women, as far as I know. The women are, and I hate to generalize, but women do love to help things happen and nurture projects, and they are very good at making everything come together smoothly. But my experience is that young women are not brave enough to say, I want the film to be my film, and I want to be the director. And if it's a television show, they need to say, I want to be the creator of the television show, and I would like to have the creator credit, and I want to run the show. So those positions of the director in the feature film or the showrunner in television are not very much held by women. And I think sometimes you see a very prominently placed woman in a Disney situation. You know, they have been nurturing people along for Frozen and what was the other one they had?
Brave.
That was yes. But in general, not very many women directors, and in television, so few animated showrunners. That is a bit scandalous.
Right, you mean just within live action even?
Well, I mentioned animation.
Okay, yeah.
And it's even true in live action. I mean, when you look at female directors in live action, there are so few as well.
But the future, when you talk about the future should be not just representation of women, but representation of people of color and representation of people of different sexuality, and, you know, there's a lot of white men everywhere.
And that means not just sort of like who has the jobs, but who are the characters, who are the, it's like the, I mean, it's interesting that we see efforts being made. We see kind of like what an African-American princess looks like in Princess and the Frog, but then we also see sort of like the studio interpret the results and sort of like take it as if it's,
no, she got exiled from the princess group.
And so it's like, yeah, but I mean, it's absolutely true that like, it's almost kind of like a refrain that we hear, that it's all about story, something you were sort of saying. But I mean, in a way, it's like but there's a lot missing from the story universe, a lot of novelty there. Yeah.
And I think the opportunity is that we can diversify that voice, and the fact that, you know, we have all this digital technology, we have the world where everyone wants to do animation, and there's a demand for this. Is that I think it's really up to all the creators, whether you're a woman, you're gay, you're, you know, from China, whatever, is to start taking these stories and try to globalize that, so that it can be shared and it can be entertaining, because ultimately, you know, we're all here to be entertained, and if we can entertain that audience, you know, the more power to give us that diverse, you know, that diversity that we don't currently have in our marketplace. And
well, I'd like to open the floor up to the audience, but like things are getting kind of good and feisty right now. So I'm gonna follow this and like be thinking of your questions. I hope you'll jump in with some. But I mean, it's great. We have one right there. We'll bring a microphone to you though. So there's one just a few feet away.
Thank you for the excellent commentary. I totally agree with you. My question is, for the people who make those stories, how do you convince the distribution channels to take them on?
making stories that are a little more daring already, you mean? Yeah, so...
Or female-focused, or have some other central character, or issues about the world, or that sort of thing.
So in other words, the stories are out there. How do you get someone to stand behind them and create them, release them? Do any of you sort of...
I was giving it to Françoise, yeah. She works in distribution.
Right, okay. Yeah. But I don't think it's exclusively a distribution question. It's also partly a pitching question. It's partly a, finding, I mean, Jinko, you're in the position of kind of like being someone who's looking for material, and like, how do you sort of convince someone in that position too? So any of you could answer. But we'll start with Françoise, you're in the hot seat.
Alors, je vais faire une réponse peut-être un peu corporate, mais je fais partie d'un groupe audiovisuel, puisque STUDIOCANAL est une société qui appartient au groupe Canal+. Et j'ai le sentiment, en tous les cas, en ce qui concerne la France, que c'est des problématiques qui sont tout à fait partagées par les diffuseurs et sur lesquelles on échange, d'ailleurs au sein des femmes s'animent, on échange aussi avec les diffuseurs, que ce soit le groupe Canal, mais aussi France Télévisions, sur ces problématiques-là. Donc je pense que si les histoires sont bonnes, il n'y a pas de frein particulier au niveau des diffuseurs. Et en tous les cas, c'est des sujets auxquels ils peuvent être tout à fait sensibles.
Do you want to add on?
Yeah, what I was going to say is that, I mean, it is a business. So I think, whatever is being pitched by whomever, I mean, we have to be convinced that we know it's going to make money. I mean, it is an industry, and so if it's going to be for television, if it's going to be for film, whatever that platform is, I mean, you have to be convincing that there's going to be an audience out there for it. And I think if you can convince that, then I think you'll get people behind it. And that may require you doing a little test, doing a short. But I think there are lots of creative ways to approach this now, that these tools are accessible to people. And there's so much talent out there that it is very different from where we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So I say don't give up. Everyone should really should figure out a way, because if your passion and your dream is to be in this business, the more people trying to do this will, I think, start changing the industry in terms of how the buyers are going to be looking at things.
Where else do we have questions here?
Hi.
Someone has a microphone. Go ahead. Back in the back.
Yeah. My question's for Lisa. Lisa, with this new technique, or with the technique that you're using for Splash, how much quicker would you say is it to complete a episode? Like from script to completion, compared to the normal 3D process?
Oh, from script to completion.
Yes.
Well, we do several weeks of post-production on it. This section that you saw, we do 9 minutes a day. So the animation part is 9 minutes a day, which is incredibly fast, but the rest of the process is about the same as other CG. So we have the same amount of time modeling and rigging and lighting and rendering.
Okay, so
So it just reduces that one section.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. There's a question here. Do you have the microphone? Go ahead, please.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. All three of you are very inspiring. I have one question more specifically towards Françoise, but it can open up the floor to the other two. You were mentioning how you were looking for many international objectives. I was just curious, do those international objectives also apply for artists or outsourced company or country workers? Like international relations between North America and here for potential work opportunities. Also, that goes towards back towards North America and the United States. Do you guys look for international workers from here or anywhere else?
You mean about recruiting is what you're asking. So like to what extent the partnerships you have come from abroad? And,
Oui, donc nous distribuons nos films dans le monde entier, mais nous travaillons également, nous essayons en tous les cas de travailler avec des producteurs du monde entier, particulièrement des producteurs européens. Dans le film que vous avez vu, on a des producteurs qui sont anglais, français. On travaille également avec l'Allemagne. Donc, effectivement, on essaye d'avoir des collaborations qui soient à la fois tournées vers l'extérieur en termes de production et en termes de distribution chez STUDIOCANAL.
And with STUDIOCANAL projects, because they're almost independent films or different studios that have their own system, the teams, I assume, are sort of made up by whichever entity is sort of making the film, right? So
oui.
Aardman staffs itself, and you
oui,
guys are
on travaille toujours en collaboration avec des producteurs et qui constituent eux-mêmes leur équipe créative. Donc si c'est d'un point de vue d'animation, par exemple, les animateurs, etc., sont recrutés par les producteurs avec lesquels nous nous associons.
Mm-hmm. Jinko, in the projects you've worked on, how international are the teams? I'm guessing Little Prince is more than usual.
Yeah,
even,
it gets pretty international, especially if you can go and work in countries where immigration is much easier. Mm-hmm. So like Little Prince started in Paris, and then the unit, or the filmmakers, we moved to Montreal. Mm-hmm. And we did that for tax credits. And it was really the first major CG feature being done in Montreal. So we got talents from everywhere in Canada, as well as some from Europe, and a lot from France, and some from the States. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's definitely opportunities. And, you know, I know large studios come to Annecy every year because, I mean, there's great talent here in Europe. And a lot of you guys that are, you know, students, you know, you don't have the opportunity to go to the U.S. to be recruited, so the studios are here definitely wanting to recruit.
I think I saw the microphone over here. Yep.
My question is to the whole panel, and it's basically a bit of a follow-up. I wonder, at what stage, or what's the best way to contact people like you, or studios? If you have an idea and you're passionate about a film, for example, me personally, I'm doing a stop animation film, and I'm about to complete it, and I just wonder, do you complete it, do you bring it to a festival, and then try to make a contact, or is there any point in before perhaps where you go and show your work to somebody and see, I don't know, you know, where's the best point to get in touch with people to bring it any further?
I mean, that's a really great question, and it's maybe the kind of thing that we take for granted that people know, but it's really like, I mean, it's sort of great advice. I don't know if each of you could sort of offer a word of advice to, if anyone here in this room is sort of like sitting on, you know, incubating a great idea, where do you begin in sort of like getting it out to the world? We've got great women storytellers, we've got great women's stories and diverse, you know, people here, like.
I mean, it's we're definitely a business where you have to get to know people, whatever you have to do, you know, get to know people. There are buyers, there are people at the festivals, there are, you know, people that could be your mentors, but really, it's really about getting your foot in the door, and then when you're given that chance, you know, make sure you have something that is going to be so compelling that people are going to go, you're a talent that we want to keep tabs on. You know, maybe not be this particular project that you bring in, but it's that human connection, because we are a very human-based business, and you know, I have talent that you know I recruited, you know, 25 years ago, and I still think of them, you know, as a 20-year-old, and they're, you know, 45 years old. But I mean, it is a very relationship-based industry. And so I encourage all of you guys, you know, if you've got a great idea, you know, find a way to, you know, don't be afraid, you know, and.
The answer is not to finish your film and take it to a festival, though. The answer is to get enough that you can impress people with, and then as early as possible and as persistently as possible to get it in front of not just people who would pay for it or distribute it, but people who would want to collaborate with you, who would work on it. I mean, if you look at that movie, The Prophet, that was here, and just sort of dig into sort of the backstory of that, that's really a labor of love that brings together all of these different people kind of passionately wanting to do it. And for independent level animation, that really is kind of, you know, there's no pathway, but that's, that's an interesting kind of model.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, when I worked on 9, Shane Acker had done a student short, 9, and he had spent 5 years, 6 years making this short. And he got into the festivals, and then Jim Lemley saw the short and said, okay, I'm going to get this movie made. And he went and got Timur, and then the two of them went and got Tim Burton, and all of a sudden there's a movie. So there are lots of different ways to doing this. And after, Shane got 9 off the ground, everybody was trying to do shorts and get into festival, but that's not necessarily the golden path,
I think also you should send your material to people who you admire, who you think your work is simpatico with their work, because they're likely to look at your work more, they're going to be more excited about seeing your work if it's kind of similar to what they do. So I pay little attention to most animation that crosses my desk, but if it has something like I call a Henson flavor, it jumps out and I might be contacting that person or have somebody from my staff contact that person. And similarly, there have been people who have animation kind of in the Tim Burton style, and they get signed by Tim Burton's agent, because this person likes that kind of work. So I say to try to look for the people that you admire, that you think your work is similar-ish, because they will be looking for people like you.
Well, it's the thing in animation that I hear over and over again, which is that it's possible to sort of work with your gods, the people that you like aspire to becoming or whatever. What might be tricky is to sort of like leap everything and to be able to direct. That's very unlikely. But if you're willing to sort of like, scrub the toilet floors in the office of Tim Burton, there's a pathway or whatever. It doesn't have to be that low, but I mean, it's like but there are definitely sort of like, the people who, we saw the I don't know how many of you were at the Disney presentation before this, where, one of the directors on stage started out, sort of being a tour guide at the Disney theme parks. It's like I mean, that's an example of, they knew that Disney was like their destiny. And they got in at the entry level, and somehow, I don't know the steps along the way, but I mean, he's here presenting, right? So there's that. Do you have the microphone yet? Let's bring the microphone down to you. Is there one over on this side ready? Go ahead. You'll get the microphone in a moment. Or, sorry, we've got 2 fine. We'll get one to you eventually. I'm gonna do you so that we can pass it down. Go ahead, in the tank top.
Can I ask in French?
Sure.
J'ai remarqué qu'on évolue dans un monde qui évolue assez vite, avec notamment des nouveaux moyens de financement, que ce soit des coproductions par le public, le crowdfunding ou par les artistes eux-mêmes, des nouveaux moyens de production aussi qui permettent de réduire les équipes et d'aller plus vite, notamment sur l'animation 2D en ce moment qui revient. Et enfin des nouveaux moyens de distribution qui sortent un peu de la télévision et du cinéma. Et je me demandais si vous y réfléchissiez, si vous pensez qu'il y avait un avenir là-dedans, et si ça semblait... oui.
Sur les nouveaux moyens de distribution, oui, bien sûr, on s'intéresse évidemment à tous les nouveaux moyens de distribution, que ce soit les plateformes SVOD ou les plateformes type YouTube, et à essayer de monétiser nos contenus sur ces plateformes-là. Vraisemblablement, c'est un des avenirs de l'animation, effectivement, d'aller sur ces plateformes et de trouver des moyens de rémunérer les contenus sur ces plateformes.
So the question was basically about the new avenues to get sort of animation out there, basically, and finding the support for it, basically, the means, the budget. I mean, certainly, it's sort of what we were talking about a little bit earlier with transmedia, except there we were looking at it in terms almost of extensions of certain brands. But there's the creation of animation, is specifically what you're asking about, the creation of animation for sort of unconventional or new emerging avenues. Lisa, I'm curious whether that has already happened with you guys at the Henson Company, or if you're still sort of focused strictly on television and film?
No, well, in terms of digital and television, we make shows that are premiering on just digital platforms like Hulu and Netflix and Amazon. But I think, you can also just put it online on any number of other platforms that are interested in animation. I think the difficulty with the tools of production being really easy to obtain, and it's not a high bar to get into production, but to get people to see what you do is the biggest challenge for everybody here, including us. Yeah. How do we get people to see what we make? Also, with all the love and attention that we put into these projects, when it just goes online and there's billions of things there, how do people discover it? So we'll always need marketing.
Right, yeah. We'll take the last two questions. I think that the microphones are in two hands right now. So on this side, there was, someone had a question.
Somebody's going nuts back there.
Hello.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yes. You mentioned briefly the Oculus, and I wondered, do you think all the VR headsets that the gaming industry is trying to promote right now, could it be the next big thing for animation?
What is the technology?
Oculus.
Virtual reality headsets, all those like Oculus.
Oh, okay, sure,
Stuff
yeah.
like that. What do you think of those technologies?
Well, we also make programs for very young children, so there will be some limitations because young children are not even meant to watch stereoscopic, much less Oculus.
Right.
So it's going to be for the older animation, for the adults. But I think it's very exciting, and even beyond Oculus, I like to be in Jim Cameron's head right now, thinking how to immerse us in every way in what he makes, because that's where it will ultimately go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in some ways that's an extension too of the idea that this is a really old-fashioned technology. I mean, it's nice that we can still get our friends together and go to the movies, but I don't know if our grandkids will,
I think it's going to change. I think it will definitely change. And
Well,
you've got, these real-time gaming engines, and you've got these renderers that are really, really sophisticated. And I think it's really about that experience. What is that entertaining experience that we're going to create?
Yeah.
And I mean, it always starts from that. I mean, it's not technology. It's really about what is that entertaining experience that people are going to want, And as soon as somebody cracks that, I think it'll take off.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at Sundance this year, there was a former Pixar animator had developed some sort of VR short that was interactive, and I didn't get a chance to experience it, so I'm dying to know what it was, but it's already an example of kind of that could be in your living room or whatever down the road, and it's I mean, like the Glenn Keane thing on your phone, it's an indicator of the potential, but I mean, it certainly seems like the VR thing is coming. When we talked about the sort of fine line between live action and animation, but certainly in the world of gaming, there's another kind of line between animation and this kind of this that where you're creating your own kind of movie environment as it goes. The question, last question over here, sir. You've got the microphone. Shout it.
I have it here. I have the microphone here, please. All right. So my name is Francis Brown. I'm coming from Ghana, West Africa. And I would like to know what African animation is like worldwide, and what can we do to improve our stories, because I know we have a lot of authentic stories, and people are really doing a lot of them, but how best can we push it into the mainstream? Thank you.
Interesting. I don't know if you guys have the context for, but I'd be interested to know your perception on African animation is sort of the question.
I don't know specifically about African animation per se, but I do know a lot about Asian stories. And one of the things that I keep saying to my Asian colleagues is that if you can take local stories and globalize that, meaning that put that into the Western storytelling format of the 3-act structure, then you can really share your local stories worldwide. So I'm hoping that that's something that, you know, you can do with the African stories as well, because I think people will then relate to it, you know. The film medium is so Western driven that I think we're so used to this 3-act structure with character development that if you can tell your story, share your world by this 3-act structure, I think, you know, you can take any story from anywhere.
Mm-hmm. I mean, The Prophet's another example, well, not an African story, of sort of coming from another culture, and a culture that's not heard from very often, and it's a very untraditional kind of piece of material that's sort of been built out in exactly the way you're saying, where so it's the hunger for, you know, an experience of those kind of cultures. I mean, to me, that's what the movies, every time I go to the movies, that's what it is. It's a chance to sort of put myself into the shoes of someone other than myself. But the challenge is always to give that audience member enough to relate to that they can kind of make the jump. And so your advice is basically exactly that. There's the opportunity and probably curiosity for those stories.
Yeah, I think there's definitely curiosity because, you know, we all love different types of stories. And if you look at, you know, books that sell, you know, look at all the books that come from the Middle East or, you know, places of the world where people have so many different types of stories to share, but, you know, they do it in a template that makes it so clear that it can be shared.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I'm sorry I mismanaged your question, sir. But let's please hear it for the 3 panelists and for their insights. Thanks.